Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and you take time to listen into the podcast. And because you've been listening in, you helped us get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes. So thank you for listening in. And if you would help us a little bit more, go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. All right. So today I'm talking with Rebecca Bloom. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Rebecca. Rebecca is the author of the upcoming book, When Women Get Sick. And the book shows women and their supporters how to maximize coverage, benefits, and security, and minimize stress, fear, and confusion as they navigate illness. And Rebecca has been a patient and workplace advocate for 25 years. She's a former attorney, workplace and benefits attorney who has worked with thousands of women. And she's also a Yale and NYU School of Law educated attorney. And we'll hear so much more about Rebecca. Welcome, Rebecca Bloom.
Thank you so much, Robin. So great to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. Okay, all right. So you heard me just say a little bit about your bio. I just read a little bit. Why don't you tell us in your own words about who you are and then what you do?
Sure. So I started out my career as a lawyer, as you said, and I recognized quickly that the way to be a really good advocate for somebody was to have empathy and to understand the story and understand how to tell the story. And so that led me kind of down two paths later in my life after I had kids and after I left big firm law behind. One was to become a patient advocate for women who are dealing with illness. That happened after my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and then my sister was also diagnosed with breast cancer. So I have always been high risk, and I have two adult daughters. So you can imagine why that's something that's deeply important to me and personal to me. But I also kind of carried forward all the training that I had around how to represent a situation. And I realized that was really about storytelling. And I'd always been a writer and a bit of an editor as well. Those were always my jobs in college. So I became a storytelling coach and developmental editor. And I help mostly women writers get their books out and published and help them strategize how to do that. So I've also taught a bunch of writing. So those are kind of the two tranches of my career today. But my longest and proudest affiliation, as I often say, is an organization here in the Bay Area in Northern California, where I live, called Bay Area Cancer Connections. And that's, to stay any place for more than 25 years says a lot, right? Um, it's because they're leaders in how to put women first, and they've always supported me in doing whatever backflips and whatever my energy allows to really try to help their clients. And what I've learned is it makes a difference.
Mm,
And making a difference is my purpose. So there you go.
yes, yes. And I can relate to that when you say making a difference is your purpose, because same for me, making a difference. And it sounds like you're doing really important work on both ends of the spectrum there with the writing and with the advocate work. All right. So tell us about you have some books already out and you have a book coming out. Tell us about the book coming out.
Sure. So the book that's coming out is called When Women Get Sick. And so, not all the agents loved that title. you know, um, I think some of them felt that it wasn't uplifting enough. And I kind of stuck to it because for me, you know, we need to normalize the fact that people do get sick. And one of the problems people have when they get sick is how marginalized they feel. And women in particular are already marginalized in so many ways that are baked into our culture, particularly women of culture of color, and women who are part of other suspect classifications, as we would call them in the law, right? And so the idea that this isn't uplifting. I defy that. I think, everybody needs a buddy. Everybody needs an advocate. Everybody needs a witness. It could be very lonely, and people are terrified of illness and they don't want to hear it, and they don't want to hear hard news, tough stories, difficult challenges. But if people link arms and work together, you would be amazed at a difference at the difference that it makes. And I've seen this over and over again. That's why I keep doing this work. I believe in it, and I believe that even if I can't change the bigger problems, like we don't have single payer in this country and we pay way more for health insurance and get way less than any other citizens of any other civilized nations, and that is true. What I can do is share what I've learned, show people what you can actually do and how you can actually do it to make a difference for the life of one woman, two women, 10 women, 48 women, and on. And I really remember those commercials. I told two friends and they told two friends and so on. Remember those
I
commercials?
do.
Well, that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping, this, for me, this is a movement. If people would understand what is possible, and to me, that's really uplifting. What is possible? They could really make a difference for their friends, their neighbors, their sisters, their wives, their cousins, their daughters, their mothers, their grandmothers.
Yeah, yeah. Good for you for sticking with what you want the title. So
Yeah,
congratulations, because for a lot of people they would have just backed down, but good for
yeah,
you. And for your commitment to this movement. And my work is all about purpose, as you know. But if you're sick and you don't have what you need, how can you be anywhere? How could you think about your purpose? How could you have a mindset of even doing that? Or if
yeah.
someone you are, connected to, as you're talking about people who are supportive. So I
It's so
appreciate that.
interesting that you say that because, in my work with women, I've seen this over and over again. That's one of the things that makes the struggle so hard, is that it's as though you're derailed from your life's work. And I don't mean that just in a clock punching 9 to 5 work way. I mean your purpose, your goals. You kind of go into patient land, and it's almost like you've heard about stories about people who retire and all of a sudden they feel unmoored because they're not doing anything that's so important anymore or that's tied to what they really care about. They're going, oh, I thought golf was going to be amazing all day long, and then they find out maybe not so much, right? um, but it's so interesting that you say that because I'm not quite finished with my manuscript, but I'm getting very close. And one of the things I've realized is, in trying to end this book the way I really want it to to hit for readers, what I find myself talking about is how to find your center, how to find your way back, and
Mhm,
how to think about what you can do,
mhm.
not just for yourself, but to make it better for other people. And really that is purpose, right?
It is.
And I have found that when I talk with people in that way, they're inspired. And, think about all the people who, get a disease and then they want to walk in the fundraiser for that disease. Well, why do you think that is? It's because that's closer to who they really are, a
Mhm.
capable person who has a purpose.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and that
Yeah.
is my definition of purpose, is being in alignment with who you really are, and you can express that in a variety of ways, and you're right, I have heard that example over and over again. So now tell us how you got into this work. Tell us about what I hear your passion and your commitment about this. Tell us where that comes from.
Yeah. So, my legal career, I always felt that I was seeking justice. And then I had big student loans, so I ended up not quite seeking justice the way I had hoped, but I learned so much in private practice. I really did. Maybe I didn't work for the good guys all the time, but I learned what happens behind the curtain. And that was really helpful, especially because I was working as a workplace lawyer. So I understood, how do employers think and how do they treat employees? And then when I moved on to, I mentioned that my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I had moved to California and she lives in New York. So I went home to be with her during her surgery and some of her early treatment. And what I realized was she had my dad, who is a smart lawyer, and she had me, and she had health insurance. And even with all of that privilege, it was unbelievably overcomplicated. It was scary. It was confusing. You ask one person a question, you get one answer. You ask somebody else a question, you get another answer. You call an insurance company to get what you thought was a simple answer to a basic question. You're on hold for 3 hours and you hang up with a headache, and you know less than you knew before you made the call. These things happen to people. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, if this is happening to my mother, what is happening to all the other women who are dealing with this? So I got back on a plane to California and I marched into this place that I mentioned. It was at the time called Community Breast Health Project. Now it's called Bay Area Cancer Connections. And I went, I made a meeting with the executive director. And I tell you what, I was clueless. I said, look, I have this very specific legal background. It's around workplace law and also around benefit plans, which includes health insurance. And I'm just wondering, is there anything I could do for the women that you serve? And I mean, the woman looked at me and laughed in my face. She said, are you kidding? She said, that's really kind of an unlikely thing, and if this specialty inside of a big law firm is tiny, it's probably like 2% of the entire large law firm. It's not your average specialty. So it just seemed like not an accident. And when I had that conversation with her, I thought, oh my goodness, I trained for something. I didn't even know why. Now I know why.
Uh, so in other words, she was delighted that
Yes.
you asked that question.
Yes. She
Like,
wasn't ridiculing me when she
yeah,
laughed. It was like a laugh of joy.
yeah, she probably couldn't believe it that you just walked in out of nowhere,
Yeah.
seemingly out of nowhere, and provided the support that they needed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And then later my sister was diagnosed, and then I realized I was high risk, and I myself have had all kinds of tests and screening and, all of those
Mm,
stressors. And,
yeah.
it's just given me a better window into what people go through,
Mm,
and more empathy and more experience.
yeah.
So I just get more and more motivated to make this better for other women.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad you're doing that. And I'm sure you do it in a variety of ways there and in the book. So, what is the main premise of the book?
So the main premise of the book is don't go it alone. Think about who you can tap in your life to really walk with you.
Mm,
No woman should do this by herself. There's really no reason for it. But it's also some nuts and bolts and
mm,
some really practical pieces of information that people tend not to think of, and stories.
mm,
Because one of the things that I have learned is women are the storytellers. We're the culture keepers. This is not new information, right? I mean, when you study different cultures, you see who's sitting around the fire telling the stories. Women keep the stories. And so part of my aim in this book is to bring women together through one another's stories and to honor the women that I've worked with by telling theirs. And so that's what's inside the book. It's the stories, it's the practical nuts and bolts based on experience. And it's also a bit of a clarion call. You
mm.
know, there are ways to make change inside communities on small levels that truly can ripple. And that's what I'm going for.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're doing that work. So glad you're doing that work. It's very meaningful. I mean, I think about when I just go for my annual checkup, and then the doctor, and this happened to me just recently, the doctor just gave me some few, kind of checkup kinds of things to do, and with nothing written down. And then when I got as far as the car, I'm like, wait, what did she say? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Just something like
Oh,
that. So
yeah.
imagine if you have this, something you're afraid, or you're upset, and you hear something, you can't take it in, and you can't remember all the steps you're supposed to do. So
Absolutely
yeah.
true. And that's really, an illness is like miracle grow on that kind of, anxiety that you have when it's like you're in a room with a doctor, you get 7 minutes, right?
Mm.
And you're trying to hear everything they say. Well, imagine if you already know you have an illness and you're trying to think through all the parameters of what they're saying to you. And to them, they've got 25 people to see in a day and they've got to get everything in the notes right while they're standing there talking to you. They're probably not even looking in your eyes, right? I mean, there's so many things that happen in our system that work against a woman feeling comfortable and seen and cared for and like she's getting everything explained to her. And that's not to say there aren't so many wonderful doctors, there are, but our system is biased against that kind of empathy-based conversation. And, it just there's so many pressures on the system that are monetary that people don't see. You have to use this app and you have to check in the portal and you have to do this and you have to do that. And, the patient doesn't know all that stuff that's going on behind the scenes, but the doctor is under so much pressure to get through it and get it done and get it right. And things slip between the cracks and people don't feel as confident and heard as they could,
Mhm.
but we could do something about it. So
Yeah.
that's again, that's why I say, I don't think this is depressing at all. People say to me, how can you do work like that? You must lose people. Well, sure, of course, I grow to care about people, and sometimes it doesn't go the way I wish it did and the way we were fighting for it to go. Of course. But that's no reason not to do it. You can't dehumanize people because they get sick, right? It's a great equalizer. Everybody gets sick.
Yeah. 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 Well, all the more, I keep saying, and I do appreciate this very important work that you're doing.
Well, thank you.
Now, would you say you have a sense of purpose in your work now that you're doing this work?
Oh yeah. I mean, I get up in the morning and my mind is going a million miles an hour because I am so motivated to make a difference. And I think, when you're younger and you have, the pressure of, like I said, paying off a student loan or, you know, getting your kid through college when you get a little older, you know, your purpose sometimes has to be a little more practical. Well, I'm done with that. I want to move the mountains now. That's and I'm ready to do it. And I honestly have just as much energy as I ever did, maybe more.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Good for you. Good for you. All right. Um, you told us how you got there and you came into this, but is there a part of you that is reflected in the work that you do?
oh, absolutely. You know, advocacy is an art. It isn't
Hmm.
really a science. And, you were talking before about being closest to your truest self as a thing in purpose. Well, I'm not a screamer. I'm not a yeller. I like to look at the whole picture. I like to really listen to the person I'm speaking with, even if we're in conflict, and try to reflect back the piece that we do have in common and try to humanize and experience because that's who I am as a human. And yeah, the work that I do, definitely, I bring in the nuances of my personality, the emotional wisdom that I have hopefully gained by being on this planet as long as I have. Um, the things I've learned by losing, the things I've learned
Mm.
when things went my way, all of the above. It matters who the person is I'm advocating for. It matters what she wants, what her goals are. Not everybody's goals are the same. Sometimes I'll have a woman who all she cares about is staying in her home. That's all she cares about. Other times it's what is my legacy to my children, and other times it's am I going to look terrible after that um operation. Whatever her goal is, I don't judge the goal. I just try to get her there as
Mm-hmm.
best I can. Because
Mm-hmm.
that's really what's important, right?
Yeah. Was there any part of you when you were a little Rebecca going to school? Was there any part of you that was an advocate back then? Do you see any reflection of you then showing up now?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I was always like justice obsessed. Um,
Even
but
as a child?
oh yeah, and I always wanted to be like my dad, and my dad was a lawyer, and he is a lawyer. Gonna be 90 years old. Um, and such a kind, fair-minded person, so full of equanimity. I thought I was going to work for maybe like the ACLU or do something like that. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I always wanted to be a lawyer. And I wanted to fight for what was right. And I wanted to be somebody who took her gifts. I, I've always been pretty verbose, I would say, and pretty good at stating a case, as it were, or telling a story, right? Depending on how you look at that. I wanted to use those gifts. It was
Mm,
really important to me that I did that. So yeah, it was always that way.
yeah.
Always. I always wanted to fix stuff, make stuff better. Definitely.
Yeah, I love that. And for people who are listening, there might be some people who are looking for this purpose, right? And so for some people, they may be like you and have inklings where you had more than an inkling. You were convinced. You
Yeah.
were determined at a young age. And some people they have bits and pieces of it. So I encourage people to look back that when they were children to see the things that lit them up to help them have some guidance for where they are now.
I think that's such a great way of looking at it. Another thing that I always think about, and I've said this before in talking with folks about it, is you know, I mentioned like when you're younger and sometimes you have to do something to make a living, to pay off your loans, things like that. But there's always something good about whatever you're doing and whatever opportunities you have, and you have to see it that way, right? Um, well, you don't have to, but hopefully you do. Um, and then, I thought like, well, how do you find your purpose when you have a little more freedom? And for me, the exercise is I looked at what were the things that I was doing that really jazzed me, that I really loved. Strip away the stuff like the late nights and the cab rides home and the dinners that ordered in and all that stuff. I don't care about any of that. But the actual listening to a person who has some kind of need state, trying to intuit what they need and how best to help them get there. I love that. I know that's what makes me wake up in the morning
Mm,
excited. So
mm.
that's a part I kind of lift away and stick with. And that's how I get to where I'm excited about what I do.
Yeah, and I felt that energy. Like when you just as you were talking about it, I felt the energy coming through. So that's wonderful. Well, I mentioned, there are people listening who, and so let me tell you a little bit more about who I think the listener is. High achieving women, and my definition of high achieving women, because we probably use it in different ways, different people.
Sure.
Women who are responsible, just generally responsible, goal oriented, ambitious, and I mean that in the positive sense of the word, ambitious.
Yep.
They're good at a couple things. People come to them in their professional lives and ask them questions and for advice, whether it's related to whatever they're doing or not. And the same thing in their personal lives. People, family, friends, community members just ask for their advice. They're the ones that people go to. So I thought, well, they're supporting everyone else. Who supports them? And especially now when they're at this point of looking for, and for some people, craving purpose in their life. So I thought, well, I'll have conversations with other high achieving women and we can speak to that woman.
I love that you say that too, because again, that's really what my book is about. Find your circle of people, and a lot of them are going to be women. It's, I mean, my book is for women, it's about women, so do the math, right? And that's exactly it, and I really like your definition of a high achieving woman too, because I think even if you ignore Instagram completely, there are a lot of definitions of success, right? And I try to ignore it as much as I can, but you know, there's some business realities to that too. So yeah, I think a circle of supporters, of peers is so crucial, not only in finding your purpose, but in getting after it. We really can help each other. No
Mm,
question.
yeah, that's wonderful. All right. So now you've given us some gems already, but what other advice would you give to that woman I described who's at this point where she's really craving how to have more meaning and purpose in her work, in the realm of her work?
I would say bring your top 5 favorite things about yourself, your gifts, to the table every day as you approach your work. I don't think you can go wrong if you do that.
Yes. Yes. I think I just said those words earlier today. It was earlier today. I
Really?
didn't say top 5, but it is part of the framework that I use for purpose, and one of them has to do with bringing your gifts. I call them your natural abilities, but we were saying the same thing as been happening throughout our conversation.
Yeah.
All
How
right,
cool.
Rebecca, you've been so generous with your time. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share? Something that maybe popped up now, or just one more thing? If not, okay. But if so, here's your opportunity. And then we'll tell people where they can be in touch with you.
Okay, yeah. I I would I would want to know amongst your listeners, do you do you suggest that they read anybody's work? Do you have a guide post for yourself and your ethos and your writing and your teaching? I would love to hear that, because for me, I think one of the ways that we can circle up together is by sharing the learnings of our personal mentors, even if we haven't met them, just if we connect with what they have to say.
Yes, and building on what you and I were just talking about, when your use of, highlight and focus on your gifts, and for me, natural abilities. And a person who talks about that in a book that I've talked about more than once here on the podcast is the book The Big Leap. Do you know this
Hmm.
book?
I have heard of this book. Yes.
It's by Gay Hendricks, who was a Stanford psychologist who then went into business and
Hmm.
does that very thing. He helps folks, especially high achieving people, men and women, to tap into and discover and to focus on their gifts, or what I would call natural abilities. And
Yeah.
he calls them activities. He did exactly what you said. He didn't say top 5, but he said, look at the activities in your day where you express those things that are easy for you and hard for others, and they light you up. And he calls those set of activities, those activities fall in the zone of your genius. And there's other zones of activity that your work could fall into, but focus on the majority of your time on the activities that fall into your zone of genius, and instead of your zone of incompetence, zone of competence, and zone of excellence. So anyway, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks.
That's great. Thank
Yeah.
you. I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah.
All right. So I'm imagining people want to know what more about you, what you're doing, how they can be in touch with you, and what do you say to them?
I say come to my website, www.whenwomengetsick.com, or Instagram at whenwomengetsick. No Facebook for me. Long story. You don't need to hear it today. But that's where, and I can be contacted directly in those ways. And I should say, Robin, that I am willing to advocate for and support any woman who calls me for free. Any woman who calls on me, because that's how strongly I feel about this.
What a generous gift, Rebecca. I feel your heart. I feel your heart when you say that. So I know it's true. That's very generous. Thank you for offering that. And, you know, I'm so glad you stepped out and said, I'm going to focus on this work. And again, I'm going back to the title of the book, When Women Get Sick, because you don't know how people are going to take it. You don't know what it is, but it's important work. It's not work that you hear a lot about, especially from someone that has the compassion and commitment that you do. So thank you for doing that and for sharing it here with us. Really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun getting to talk to you and getting to know you.
Okay, everyone. And if you want to hear more from me, I'd love to hear more from you. Head on over to the podcast website. It's leadershippurposepodcast.com, leadershippurposepodcast.com. And there I have a free resource for you, especially if you are yearning and craving and hoping and seeking more meaning and purpose in your work. So leadershippurposepodcast.com. Or if you just want to hang out on social media, unlike Rebecca, I spend most of my time at LinkedIn, but I'm on all platforms at Robin L. Owens, PhD, at Robin L. Owens, PhD. And wherever you reach out to me, I'll be grateful to hear from you. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin.